Rhyania is a powder of the root of a tropical plant and has little effect on warm-blooded animals. It makes a good many worms and insects pretty sick, and an insect in poor health won't be around long in his competitive world. In the meantime, it won't eat much either. Sabadala, a stomach poison made from seed of a tropical plant, is used as a dust to control squash bugs and other plant bugs like stink bugs. Sulfur is a good fungicide, but can't be used when temperatures are above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not use sulfur on cucurbits, cucumbers, squash, melons, etc. They are particularly susceptible to foliage burn by sulfur. Sulfur also makes soil acid, which can be counteracted by applying dolomite lime. Lime, wood ashes, rock phosphate powder, the fertilizer, are useful as dusts in some cases and for use against slugs and snails. When buying commercial preparations containing these safe substances, read the label carefully to see that they have not with a more lethal poison than you want to use. Remember also that these are not persistent pesticides and must be applied more often if there is a continuing need for control. Pure rotenone or pyrethrum may be hard to find, but are sometimes available from pet supply shops. A 1% dust is strong enough for normal use. Soap, just plain pure laundry soap, but not detergent, is useful in the garden. A soapy solution is sometimes used as a spreader in which to dissolve an insecticide powder to make a spray. New growth covered with aphids can be swished gently through a strong soap solution to eliminate the bugs without hurting the plant. Squash bugs, worms, beetles, etc., can be flipped into the small pail of strong soapy water to die. Some gardeners prefer to use kerosene as the drowning agent, and keep some ready for each trip they make through the garden rows. Water under pressure is a weapon too, especially against aphids. Besides the damage they do by sucking plant juices, aphids also spread virus disease from plant to plant, so heavy infestations must be dealt with promptly. On sturdy plants like broccoli, they can usually be hosed off with a forceful stream of water. If the affected plant parts are too fragile to take that, try one. A dust of straight rotenone or rotenone and pyrethrum will take care of the unwashed feeders. Aphids. They may be green, brown, or black, with or without wings. All suck a plant's juice and sap its strength. They are most often found clustered together on stems and leaves of new growth. One facet of biological control that is useful to the home gardener is a spray that infects specific insects with a fatal disease. The milky spore disease of the Japanese beetle is the factor that keeps the pest down to manageable numbers in its native habitat. As an imported pest in the United States, away from its natural control, it multiplied at a devastating rate until research solved the mystery and manufacturers received clearance to market the lethal substance under trade names like Doom. The disease does not have any effect on other insects, worms, birds, plants, animals, or humans. Just the members of the white grub family. More than 40 species are susceptible, but the Japanese beetle grub is the most vulnerable of all. Apply accordingly to the directions on the label, and once is enough, which twice is nice. Watchfulness is the real key to pest control under any system. Regular observation, trips through the garden, daily or twice daily during growing season peaks, are really essential, besides being enjoyable. You can often see trouble coming, and sometimes stop the buildup of a pest by just a little hand picking or a couple of shots of spray before the situation gets out of hand. Nothing is any more effective against an insect than the bottom of a size 11 work shoe, or whatever fits your foot. The time may come when, in spite of all you and your allies can do, the bean crop is threatened. That host of neatly spotted beetles turned out to be not friendly ladybugs, but decided unfriendly Mexican bean beetles. None of the safer things has stopped the onslaught. Well, you can pull the plants, or you can resort to chemicals. The latter course is the most likely, so pick the least harmful you can find. Sevin-dust is the most generally recommended. And for a fungicide, Zeneb seems to be preferred over others on the market. Reserve them for the real emergencies, and you might be surprised at how far you can go without bringing up the really big guns. There is another approach to spraying you can try if you're inventive, observant, and ambitious. You can make your own spray using homegrown irritants like ground hot peppers in a salty water and sprayed on leafy crops like cabbage and broccoli. Onions and garlic, whizzed up in the blender, are used in other formulas. Even tomato foliage, juiced, has its advocates. There are gardeners who go further afield and seek out weeds that obviously are not attractive to a given pest, then grind them for spraying on plants that are. The little green inchworm on the cabbage leaf. It may be fascinating to children, but to a gardener it is probably the cabbage looper. Here humped up in its characteristic traveling posture, seeking new and greener leaves to devour. Similar worms, of various sizes and colors, thin and brown to fat, furry, and striped, plague gardeners by feeding on plants. Pick and destroy any you see. Earworms invade the silk end of an ear of corn, then feed unseen until they provide a loathsome surprise for the cook removing the shucks. You must stop this pest before it enters the ear. Corn borers. As the name implies, bore an entry into the corn stalks. Then they tunnel through the living tissue to the detriment of the plant. They eventually bore into the ear itself, inside a tomato stem. A stalk borer can wreak similar damage. This cutaway window in a squash stem shows the squash borer at home. In the garden, the telltale little pile of material extruded from the entry hole is the only visible evidence of the pest's presence until the beautiful squash plant wilts and dies. Break. Are you interested in these books? Click subscribe below to get more content. End break. The stink bug. Large or small, green or dark, patterned or plain. Any bug shaped remotely like this one bodes no good for your garden. Primarily, stink bugs sting vegetables, causing swelling and warts, and seem to feed on just about anything you grow. Could be called number one in most gardens. The Mexican bean beetle. The poor man's ladybug has gotten the same form and a pattern of spots. The resemblance ends there, however, for bean beetles are among the worst pests in the garden. Their spiny-looking yellow larvae are destructive, too. Adult bean beetles lack the black head that characterizes ladybugs, so identification is simplified. Besides, ladybugs never eat plants. The Colorado potato beetle and its red larvae are almost the same size, and both damage crops, especially potatoes and eggplant. Orange head, yellow and black stripes mark the adults. Cucumber beetles. The cucumber beetle may have lengthwise stripes on their backs instead of the pattern of spots shown in the book. Black and yellow with an orange head is the usual coloration. There are many books available on the subject, but most of the time trial and error is the thing. If that appeals to you and you have the time to do it, by all means, jump right in. Do keep careful and accurate records of how and what and when you do things, as well as the results, not just once, but every time. Not only will such records help you, but they begin breakthrough in the relatively new field of biological control of pests. Important discoveries aren't confined, especially when it comes to gardening. Any listing of pests and problems all in a lump makes gardening seem a grim job, and the fight against the enemies an endless and hopeless one. That's not so. In the first place, you don't need a pest-free garden, as has been pointed out, and in most cases, vegetables will produce more than you can eat anyway, even if you share a few with the bugs. Train yourself to really assess the damage for a couple of days even before you rush for the sprayer. If it's not an obvious thing like a worm or two that can be removed by hand, or eggs that can be crushed, see if the problem seems worse next day, or the next. Often, a bird or predator insect will solve it for you, and only observation will keep you from spraying aphids when ladybugs are eating them. If you see a worm with clumps of small white growths protruding from its back, carefully leave that worm where it is. It has been fatally parasited by the good guys, raising more protectors to guard your garden. When you do resort to spraying or dusting, do as little of it as possible will do the job, but be thorough about getting to the underside of the leaves, as well as the tops, or you'll likely miss a lot more than you'll kill. Above all, relax and enjoy your garden. If you planted enough variety and in sufficient amount, enough delicious vegetables will come through to convince you it's all worthwhile and start you making even bigger plans for next year. Companion planting table. A list of vegetables and the neighbors they seem to prefer. Vegetable: asparagus. Companion: tomatoes, parsley, and basil. Vegetable: beans. Companion: corn, potatoes, cucumbers, summer savory. Vegetable: beets. Companion: onions. Vegetable: cabbage family, broccoli, cauliflower, etc. Companion: aromatics like mints, rosemary. Vegetable: carrots. Companion: peas, leaf lettuce, chives, onions, sage, rosemary. Vegetable: corn. Companion: beans, squash, cucumbers. Vegetable: cucumbers. Companion: beans, corn, radishes, sunflower. Vegetable: eggplant. Companion: beans. Vegetable: leek. Companion: carrots, onions. Vegetable: lettuce. Companion: carrots, radishes, onions. Vegetable: onions and garlic. Companion: beets, tomatoes, lettuce, summer savory. Vegetable: parsley. Companion: tomatoes, asparagus. Vegetable: peas. Companion: carrots, turnips, radishes, and most herbs. Vegetable: peppers. Companion: onions. Vegetable: potatoes. Companion: corn, cabbage, marigold. Eggplant will sometimes lure Colorado potato beetle to itself. Vegetable: pumpkin. Corn. Vegetable: radishes. Companion: peas, lettuce, cucumbers, nesms. Vegetable: squash. Companion: corn, nasturtiums. Vegetable: sunflowers. Companion: cucumber. Vegetable: tomatoes, onions, parsley, chives, carrot, marigold. Vegetable: turnips. Companion: peas. Chapter 7. Know what you grow. Some 30 vegetables may be said to form the backbone of year-round gardening in the Deep South. Those most often planted, and a couple that you might like to try, are included in this chapter, with helpful hints on growing each one. Their commonest pests or problems are also given, and sometimes a few serving suggestions are thrown in. After all, that's why you're gardening, isn't it? To eat the results. For more pest-fighting suggestions, read the chapter Take a Toad to Lunch. Refer to the planting guide for information on varieties, planting times, depth, spacing, days to harvest, and beans, green or snap. Green beans are generally not considered as good canners or freezers as many other vegetables, though you may want to process some for winter soups, etc. It is usually best to plant with fresh consumption in mind. Bush beans begin to bear a week or two earlier. But pole beans, like Kentucky Wonder, seem to many people finer flavored. The climbers can also save space, but both like lots of sun. Beans must have warm soil to sprout. If you have a cold snap just after you plant beans, or plant too early, you'll get poor germination and will have to replant. Supports for pole beans should be chosen with garden space in mind. A teepee arrangement of 4 or 5 poles set in a circle and tied together a foot or so from the top is one method. Poles should be 7 to 8 feet long and about 1 inch in diameter. Choose them with rough bark. Sassafras is good. If you are cutting your own, if you must buy them, select cypress or cedar if possible for their long-lasting qualities. 3 or 4 seeds are planted at each side of each pole. Remember, plants, should they need help in getting started climbing, must twine in a counterclockwise direction. A variation of the teepee is 2 rolls of poles leaning towards each other and tied securely where they cross, about a foot below the top. The teepee arrangement lets bean vines climb rough poles bound together near the top. Beans can also grow in a straight row, with upright poles set at planting time, and 2 or 3 seeds placed at the base of each one. These poles can be connected with stout cord to take care of overgrowth. If you prefer to set up permanent supports, set 9-foot poles 2 feet in the ground, spaced about 20 feet apart. Anchor the end pole securely to a tree or building by guying. These poles should be 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and again, cypress or cedar will last longest. Before they are all set up, they should have a hole bored through, a couple of inches below the upper end. Through these holes, string heavy wire, making it taut. About halfway between the wire and the ground, stretch cord the size of your little finger between the poles, wrapping it twice around each to secure it. Permanent support for climbers must be guyed for stability or secured to a nearby sturdy tree. Protect the tree from damage with a rubber hose or similar tough padding around the bracing wire. Hole bored near top of pole lets you secure permanent overhead wire and the guy wire as well. Beans are planted in a row between poles. As each plant comes up, take soft twine and tie it firmly, but not too tight below the first or second pair of true leaves. Stretch the twine gently up the horizontal cord. Make a double loop around it. Continue to the top wire. Loop again and tie securely. This growing arrangement will give you optimum conditions for observation of pests and easier picking. Plants are trained to permanent support by soft twine, first to the young plant, then stretched upward. Looped around heavy cord, midway up loose twice around the top wire, and knotted around itself. Break. Are you enjoying this knowledge of gardening? Click subscribe and check into my gardening playlist, where I will add more information. End break. These permanent supports can be set in 2 directions from a center post or on 2 sides of the garden for crop rotation purposes. You could, of course, plant only part of the row to beans each year. using the other section for other climbers, or by doing regularly row cropping under an idle section of the overhead wire. Pests on bean include the Mexican bean beetle, usually the worst. Don't confuse these insects with ladybugs, which they resemble. Rotenone dust is recommended, and it is also a control for invasions of aphids, green or black, and something of a hindrance to stink bugs that suck juices, cause warty pods. Plant varieties resistant to mosaic, blights, or virus. Limas and butterbeans. These also come in bush or climbing forms, and culture is basically the same as for green beans. They are excellent for canning and freezing. Beets. Like carrots, beets want a friable, porous soil for the best root development, with a constant supply of moisture held in the soil by organic matter. They do best in cool weather, so are grown as a fall garden crop in the deep south. Seedlings must be thinned to about 3 inches or so apart when the plants are 6 inches tall, but these thinnings can be cooked as greens. Constant water for quick growth in a soil well supplied with nutrients will usually result in a good, healthy harvest for this practically pest-free vegetable. Cabbage. Grow this crop in the fall and winter months to avoid most pests. Early Jersey Wakefield is one of the best all-around varieties. To keep cabbage heads standing in the garden without cracking from over-maturity, cut straight down through the roots on one side of the plant using a sharp shovel. This will reduce the amount of nitrates the plant takes up, thus retarding the growth of the central bud, which ultimately causes splitting. Enough roots must be left to supply moisture to the plant. Pests on cabbage include aphids, which can sometimes be washed off with a brisk stream of water, or dust the plants with rotenone. Rotenone peritherium also controls cabbage looper. If hand-picking fails, plant varieties resistant to yellows wilt. If you buy cabbage plants, inspect carefully and discard any with swelling on roots, clubroot, fungus, or seedlings with dark, shrunken stems above the soil line. Wire stem caused by a fungus. Rotate crops to avoid fungi that live in the soil. Cauliflower, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. Culture for these three is basically the same as for cabbage. When cauliflower heads begin to show through the foliage, blanch them by gathering the surrounding leaves together over the head and trying with soft twine. Brussels sprouts mature from the bottom of the stem upward and should be harvested by removing leaves from beneath the lowest and twisting the little cabbages off. Carrots. This is a vegetable you should delay growing until your soil is soft and friable and in good condition. It stays that way. A carrot that meets any opposition below ground is a deformed carrot, so soil texture is vital. Seed may be sown broadcast, then raked over slightly with a leek rake, or a thin layer of soil sifted over and where the whole planting is tamped down, gently but firmly. Carrots can share space with a leaf crop, like mustard, or with a quick-maturing vegetable like radishes. They grow best in fall and winter, when they have few pests and problems, if the soil is right. Corn. This vegetable does not like transplanting, unless grown in peat cups, so you plant the whole thing. Sow seed in deep furrows, spacing taller corn 6 to 7 feet, about 6 inches farther apart in the row than shorter growing varieties. As plants grow, hill up soil to a height of 10 to 12 inches on the stalks, so plants will form roots up the stalk for more support and heavier feeding. When you pick corn, it has everything to do with the flavor. Its sugars turn to starch swiftly, beginning when the ear is pulled from the stalk. Ideally, you have the water boiling when you pick it, allowing only minutes to elapse from garden to pot. If you must store corn at all, cool it as quickly as possible, and keep it that way to retard the chemical changes. Best cut off the cob for canning or freezing. Plant corn in blocks, not long single rows, for pollination by wind. Thin to 8 or 10 inches apart. Corn earworm can be a pest to control. With an eyedropper, inject a couple of drops of mineral oil to the tip of the ear just as it begins to silk. It is also helpful to plant a variety with a close shuck like Burgess, Peaches, and Cream, late crop. Corn borer, the caterpillar that attacks at the base of the ear, can be killed with Retenone or Rayania dust if hand picking doesn't give control. If smut fungus is a problem, remove and burn large white galls that form on stalks, ears, tassels before they can burst and release black fungus spores. Do not compost diseased plants. Cucumbers. Melons share many of the same problems. Grow them on a trellis or other upright support for uniform shape and color. Grow mildew-resistant varieties and never use sulfur on any cucurbit. Cucumber mosaic has perennial weeds and is spread chiefly by aphids, which can be controlled by rotten one. Keep garden and edges weed-free and grow resistant varieties. Rock phosphate powder, the fertilizer dusted on plants, will discourage cucumber beetle and other insects. 1 cup of wood ashes and 1 cup of lime and 2 gallons of water is a recommended spray for most pets. Cucumbers and or melons should not be grown in the same soil more than once in 3 years, or you risk anthracnose, a fungus that lives in the soil and is carried on seed. Also, reed squash. Eggplant, a true warm weather vegetable. Eggplant tastes best picked fresh from the garden and not necessarily fried. Try it in the many recipes found in the Mediterranean cuisines where it enjoys a great popularity. It should be picked while a still deep glossy color for peak flavor and to keep the plants bearing. Staking plants when they are set out will keep fruit from weighing down branches and minimize the damage from rains and winds. The pests include Colorado potato beetles. Hand pick adults. Crush the egg masses. Dust with Retenone if necessary. Rotate crops or where either has recently grown. The tomato hornworm can be hand-picked or dusted with Retenone in an emergency. Fungi causing wilts live in the soil. Flea beetles, leaves that look shot full of holes, and lacebug can be controlled with rotten one alone or in combination with pyrethrum. Garlic. Garlic is easy to grow, either from cloves you buy at the store, about a dozen per bulb, or from seed. It seems to have few pests and is credited with repelling some that feed on other plants. Greens. Mustard, collards, turnips. These should be grown mostly as a fall and winter crop, especially collards and mustard, with perhaps one early spring planting. Sow broadcast or in rows. Third, by pulling young plants for greens. Then, encourage long production by harvesting leaf by leaf. Keep plants healthy by picking off old yellowed foliage as you go. Collard plants especially will grow up on tall stems, producing leaves from the tops over several months, and most people consider the greens best after a frost. Try cooking mustard and turnips together, with a few small peeled turnip roots thrown in. Chewers, like aphids, flea beetles, cabbage loopers, can be controlled by rotenone if necessary. But cool season growing thwarts most pests. Leeks. Leeks are a vegetable in the onion group, often overlooked by gardeners, but one that withstands low and high temperatures. Can be eaten in 9 months from seed and will probably still be growing 9 months later than that. Harvest by thinning. As the older they get, the larger they get. Seed is planted in January or February, indoors. This staple of French cuisine is an indispensable ingredient in viciosi, along with your homegrown potatoes. Leeks seem to have few pests of this note. Lettuce. This is another cool weather crop, with Bibb being a reliable leafy variety. Great Lakes among the most dispendable for heads. 8 plants will yield lettuce for 2 over a 3 or 4 month season by cropping the outside leaves to harvest, and not pulling the head until it is about ready to bolt and seed. Dusting with rotenone pyrethrum will take care of the leaf hoppers, aphids, and cabbage loopers. If the latter get a hold of the hand picking, avoid successful plantings of the lettuce and cabbage or celery in the same soil. Fungi that live in the soil attack them all. Okra, a plant for warm weather and warm soil. Okra will stand still and wait until the proper level of soil warmth is reached. Too early planting won't do you any good. Plant thickly until you get a good stand, and then thin to a foot apart in the row after you are sure the young plants are doing well. Don't be in a hurry. Pick okra young and tiny for pickling or boiling whole. Larger ones that get away are good for frying, stewing, and for use in soups and gumbo, where they are a thickening agent. Okra freezes well for later use in cooking and will continue to bear until cut down by frost if it is kept picked. Sometimes large pods are left to develop for ornamental use late in the season. Avoid fungus disease by practicing 3-year rotation in one spot. Hand pick corn earworm, or, if they are suddenly too numerous, dust with Retenone. Pick okra by cutting each pod from the plant with a knife. Some people must wear gloves to avoid unpleasant itchiness. Stink bugs suck juices. Make warts on fruit. Try Retenone. Onions. Onions like cool weather. You can grow from your own seeds, but sets, dry onions harvested young for replanting, bought by the quart, are preferable for growing green onions. They will bulb later too, but if you prefer larger dry onions, use plants that are solid in bundles. Plant these 1 inch apart and pull every other one for use as green onions. The white onions are generally mild than the yellow type. Onions are fairly pest-free, but control maggots by working wood ashes into the soil around the plants when they are about 3 inches high. Parsley. This may seem an unusual vegetable to include in a basic garden, but since it is such a universal seasoning and so rich in vital minerals and vitamins, every gardener should plant some. It is a biennial, living 2 years where winters are not too severe, or if given adequate protection. Keeping old branches and yellowed leaves picked is about the only treatment necessary for parsley that is grown organically in rich soil and given ample water. Peas, English. These and potatoes are the first vegetables planted in the new year. Little Marvel is a favorite. Plant peas on a raised and flattened hill about 2 feet wide at its base and 3 inches higher than the surrounding earth. Make 2 rows of peas here, 8 inches apart and 4 to 6 inches in from each side of the hill. The double row means peas will form on the outside where the sun hits the vines, and they will fruit more heavily than when planted so the sun hits both sides of the plant. Place supports at planting time. These can be freshly cut, dry brush, or better. Straight limbs, like pruning from fruit trees, about 30 inches long and as big around as your finger. Insert these between the planted rows, spacing them about 5 feet apart. Connect them with a web of soft cotton twine, beginning about 8 inches above ground level, and crossing every 6 or 8 inches after that as you grow up. Wrap the twine a couple of times around each upright before crossing to the next. Train tendrils on the twine as they develop. Break. Would you like to experience the adventure of a lifetime? Visit www.stormnavigator.biz and book a storm tour. And break. Supports are erected at planting time between the 2 rows of peas planted 8 inches apart in the same hill. Cotton twine is wrapped securely a couple of times around each upright before being stretched to the next. Newly developing tendrils are trained from either side to collapse this twine fence. The greatest single pest on peas is the aphid, and cool weather growing is the best way to deal with him. Peas are not a summer vegetable in the deep south. Try peas raw in salad, just buttered or creamed with new potatoes. Peas, Southern. Grouter, Whiteacre blackeye. An easy vegetable to grow, these peas are a warm weather crop for a late spring garden, and good for freezing. The butter pea. The butter pea is really a small lima or butter bean, and is also a dependable and delicious vegetable. They freeze well. On southern peas and butter peas, aphids and stink bugs can be controlled by dusting with Retenone or Retenone perithium. Black humpback snout beetles, also called curculios, sometimes eat holes in pods and peas. Larvae feed within the peas. Dusting with Retenone perithium is recommended regularly if the pest is present in large number after the blossoms open. Peppers. Bell peppers should be staked when the plants are set out to allow tall growth and good production of well-shaped fruit. Green fruits, if left on the plants, will ripen to red. Some varieties turn to yellow, too, and have a sweeter taste. Peppers can be cut in strips for freezing, then chopped finer if necessary while still slightly frozen before using them in cooking. Peppers enjoy about the same culture as tomatoes and share many of the same problems, so don't plant them next to each other. Tobacco mosaic is one of those problems. Plant resistant varieties and see under tomatoes. Cucumber mosaic can be a problem, and no resistant varieties have yet been developed. Don't plant next to cucumbers or where they have been grown within the last year. Remove host weeds, destroy infected plants, and see also under cucumbers. Rotten one controls flea beetles and blossom end rot, and can be avoided by maintaining even soil moisture, giving ample lime and phosphate while not overfeeding nitrogen. Harvest peppers by cutting. Pulling can damage the plant. Hot peppers. They have generally the same cultural requirements described before. Potatoes. Irish. The Idaho bakers won't grow too well here. Only those varieties like Red Bliss that we eat as new potatoes. They are definitely a cool weather crop, and the harvest of marble-sized potatoes can begin within 70 days of planting. To plant, make a trench 10 inches wide and 4 inches deep on level ground. Place a 2-inch layer of compost in the bottom. If you have no compost, you should substitute good loose earth and work in fertilizer a couple of inches to either side of the plants. Seed potatoes should be cut in halves or quarters, making sure there are at least one sprouting eye in each piece. Press the pieces of potato, cut side down and spaced about 12 inches apart, into the compost in the center of the trench. Cover with an inch of compost or friable soil. From either side, pull up the soil and level it off, making a hill of about 7 inches above ground, level over the planted row. An alternate method uses hay from the last 8-inch layer. In either case, the potatoes will be formed from about ground level up, in the loose soil or hay, handy for harvesting. The first tiny potatoes are harvested by feeling around in the earth at the base of the plant. Whole plants are pulled as they begin to yellow. Cream with them with peas. Butter them. Use the larger ones in Machoyas. If Colorado potato beetle is too numerous, dust with rotten one. Also, a control for flea beetles and leaf hoppers. Plant early.
They will almost always recover if tops are cold killed. Rotate crops and don't plant with tomatoes, as they share a blight. Most ills of virus and fungi-caused blights are avoided by planting resistant varieties. Choose only healthy, clean tubers, having no internal discoloration or brown specks. Avoid those with scabby, raised, or pitted spots on the skin, too. Radishes. This is the kindergarten vegetable that children can enjoy planting because they are colorful and grow so quickly. If furnished sun, a light, friable soil, and ample supply of water. Radishes are a crop for succession plantings. Many of them, and in many places in the garden, plant every 2 weeks. Keep them growing fast, 4 weeks from planting, to table, for good quality and crispness. They need sun, a supply of phosphorus, and potash to form roots. Too much nitrogen can kill all tops. The many varieties until you find one especially you like. Pests are few, but if leaf damage from chewing insects is so severe that it threatens the crop, dust with rotten one. Spinach. New Zealand spinach for late spring harvest is the most successful in a Tallahassee-type climate. It is planted where it is to grow. After pulling young plants to thin, harvest by clipping the tops out of the plants. It will bear over a period of 8 weeks or more, treated this way. Don't worry about holes and leaves left by chewing insects unless they are really too numerous to tolerate. Rotten one dusting is probably the answer if they are. Squash. Yellow crookneck or straightneck zucchini. Squash is a showy vegetable with huge leaves, big silky yellow blossoms, and colorful fruit that it would probably be grown as an ornamental if it didn't taste so good. Ample water is a necessity, and with good, originally rich soil, squash can be grown fast to large sizes that it would be too tough to eat if grown slowly. Squash can be harvested at any size. In Italy, tiny squash with the open blossoms attached are brought to market each morning, but unless grown quickly, the larger ones tend to be tougher, need to be cooked accordingly. Try fresh, tender, raw squash, sliced and tossed in a salad, or cut into strips, to use with a dip on a raw vegetable hors d'oeuvre tray. For all cucurbits, don't worry if the first blossoms don't set fruit, or make small fruits that dry and fall off. They are probably female flowers, appearing before the male flowers are open to supply the pollen, or are the male flowers themselves. The same thing may happen at night, when temperatures are too low, or when later there has been a good fruit seed set, and the plant aborts the young fruit as a sort of self-pruning operation. The squash vine borer is probably the #1 pest. Watch carefully for signs of holes near the base of the stems, wilting of leaves. Slit stem where borer went in with a sharp knife or razor blade. Puncture the worm. Then mound soil over the injured spot and beyond to induce rooting. As a precaution, encourage widespread rooting of squash vines by covering stems with soil at many points as they grow. Squash bugs can be hand-picked and destroyed as adults, crushed as slimy, reddish egg clusters on leaves. They can also be trapped under boards and destroyed each morning. No sulfur on squash. That goes for all cucurbits. Winter squash. Cultural requirements are similar, but fruits must be left on the vine until fully mature for the best quality. When they are ripe, there will usually be a color change, depending on the variety. Coyote. Coyote is a squash often overlooked in planting a garden, but one which is easy to grow. It bears prolifically from luxuriant vines that cover a large trellis, pine tree, etc. in a season. The fruit ripens late in the fall, when other squash is gone, and just before the vines are cut down by frost. It can be used in almost any squash recipe, and many Mexican recipes call for coyote. Tomatoes. Undoubtedly, the favorite vegetable for home growing is the tomato, because it can almost never be bought at the peak of freshness and ripeness. Advanced soil preparation is vital. In February, or at least 3 weeks before time to set the plants, dig a 10 by 10 inch hole a foot deep for each plant. Fill with composts or other fertilizer mixed with some of the soil you removed. Mark the spot with a stick and let it mellow until planting time. Set tomato plants in deep holes, pulling up dirt as they grow to encourage deep, extensive root systems. Tomatoes don't have to be staked, but they take less room. The fruit stays cleaner and is easier to pick if they are. Bugs and other pests are easier to find as well. Pruning back 2 main bearing stems reduces the foliage cover that worms can hide in until their numbers are out of control. Support can be individual stakes, 5 to 6 feet long. Put a plant deep in the garden to the north side of each plant, as it is placed in the garden. As the plant grows, it is tied to the stake at intervals, using something soft and stretchy, like pieces of old nylon stocking, or narrow strips of old sheets. Don't tie too tightly or too close to the stakes. Always tie from the plant upward to the stake, crossing between stake and stem with a figure-8 loop. Another means of support is cages made of 5-foot lengths of woven wire fencing or concrete reinforcing wire, fastened together to make a cylinder. This is placed around the plant, sticking down into the ground when it is set out, so make them ahead of time if you plan to use them. As the plant grows, it is worked into the wire mesh and supported from all directions. No pruning is done with this method, so fruit is likely to be smaller than if the 2 main bearing stems are left on the plant, as recommended with staking. A loop-like figure-8 is one way to make sure tomato or other plants are secured to stakes, but will not be damaged by the tie itself or friction from the stake itself. Torn strips of old sheets or a similar soft material make ideal ties. Tomatoes can, of course, be trained to grow on a fence or existing trellis. Pests like hornworms and tomato fruit worms should be hand-picked if possible. They make good fish bait, by the way, if that interests you. If their numbers get out of control, try rotten one dust, which will also kill flea beetles, stalk borers, tunnel into stems. Slit the stem above the hole where the worm went in. Puncture the worm. Then bind the split stem and keep the plant well watered.